Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Action Items. I am your host, DC Man's Sfregola. You say all three of the consonants. And this episode is produced by Let's Talk Supply Chain, brought to you by New Gen Architects, your partner in technology driven supply chain transformations. So I am, as always, very excited to have our guest. This morning, we are joined by the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Brady DeLong of Hen of the Woods. And he is going to be talking with us this morning about forecasting. Brady's experience is CPG, but everything that we're talking about is 100% relevant to anyone that has any type of inventory. And forecasting, planning, making sure that you as an operations and supply chain understand how your job affects the bottom line, the top line, financial statements, tying it all back to cash flow. So welcome, Brady. I just saw you do the 4-year-old toddler wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Am I going to make it through this conversation side?
We're good. We're in. We're live. So try not to over caffeinate to overcompensate. So I think I got a good level feel. But no, next time I need an intro somewhere, I know who to call. I got a new hype woman in DC. I actually got an email the other day from someone doing an intro, and they wrote like the nicest thing, and I was just like, I have like a hype person. Like, this is awesome. This is a great way to like get introduced to someone.
So everyone's already joining. Good morning, Ajit. Good morning, Rob. As always, I'm a real traveler, citizen of the world. I'd love to know where you guys are joining from. Rob, are you normally in California, San Diego? You are out in Tennessee. Are you on vacation? Are you joining us from vacation? I appreciate it. And Brady, give us a little insight to your background. And for the audience, if you do not follow Brady on LinkedIn and you are in supply chain operations, especially at a small company, a startup, I highly recommend that you follow Brady. A lot of what he posts are great insights, great advice, great little nuggets that you can just take with you and be thinking about in your journey in supply chain and product operations. So my question for you, Brady, as you introduce yourself is, why do you post these things on LinkedIn when you could be doing so many other things with your time? Why do you say, I must share this with the world?
Well, this week I did have to actually rein it in, because it was like, I try to only allocate so much time to it. It's only so many hours in the day, and I knew I had this with you at the end of the week, which is I kind of put in the same bucket as like posting to LinkedIn, so content type of stuff. So this week I kind of had to take the week off, but yeah, I mean, I like to post stuff that what I think would have helped me like 4 years ago. Is kind of how I like to think about it. Like, where were we in 2018? What were the things that I wish someone had kind of shared with us, some different perspectives, some different frameworks that, would have helped us just make decisions either more quickly or make decisions more confidently, and just kind of think more holistically about our business. So like, those are the types of things that I'm trying to post. It's like, to me specifically 4 years ago. Right. And I feel like a lot of the content, LinkedIn's super powerful, and there's some amazing stuff out there. A lot of it's pretty like 30,000 foot, and like it's just like, and like there's some feel good stuff. There's also some vulnerability stuff, which I think it all has its place. I try to post things that I think are pretty tactical, like things that you can utilize day in, day out. But my history, is I came from the culinary world, so which I think is operations. So very much operations, pretty much my entire life. As you're a chef, you are constantly managing your supply chain, you're managing your personnel, you're managing production, you're managing execution, you're managing fulfillment. So it's all just
not just
different.
Only cooking. When I hear
So
chef, I'm like, yeah, you're cooking.
I mean, yeah, go
If
talk to a
only
chef
that's all
about,
you had to do.
yeah, the order guides and making sure you have all the inventory for your, however many dishes are on your menu, and you have your training materials prepared, and everyone's executing at the highest level, and the repetition is nailed day in and day out, sometimes 7 days a week. So it's very much the operations world. I actually had this conversation with someone the other day. It's like, why do you think chefs are able to transition to so many different fields? And I think that's a lot of it is because they're constantly in the trenches, in different aspects of the business. So came from the culinary world. Hen of the Woods was founded originally as a restaurant and market concept. I came on to kind of be the GM of the concept. And that's when we started making our line of kettle chips as a little revenue on the side, pay ourselves during the restaurant development phase there. And they were really good, obviously. We were chefs, so we had a different perspective on what we thought chips could be and should be. And we started, just with a couple of local bars and restaurants, and then first little market here, a little natural organic market here in Cincinnati. And the feedback was just great. And we've got obviously a couple of Whole Foods in town. So then we took them into our Whole Foods store. At this point in time, we're still hand seasoning everything, tossing everything in mixing bowls, hand packing, writing hand labels, the whole process. So got into some Whole Foods, and as they say, the rest is history.
There's this
So
history.
yeah,
And it's been 8 years strong, which
yeah,
is a very, we all know, most businesses getting started, most startups do not, make it in longevity. So it is
yeah.
commendable that you guys, especially during what we all know, crazy pandemic time. What are we going to do? How are we going to pivot? So one thing that, and we were kind of talking about it before we went live, and before we get into the conversation, if you also mentioned vulnerabilities, if you don't mind, before we get into the I am the expert, listen to me, I know all conversation, what challenges are you dealing with right now? It's
Um,
not these conversations, these pieces of advice, the action items for today do not come from a place of like, everything is going perfect in our world, listen to me. It comes from a place of lessons learned and things that we're dealing with right now. So, what are some of the challenges that you're facing on the supply chain operations side right now?
Mainly just finished goods, having the finished goods inventory that we need to support our growth. We're growing every month, and which is always the goal, obviously. And we're growing in a handful of different channels, which makes it even more challenging to maintain inventory in the right warehouses, in the right facilities, in the right case packs. So that has been kind of hectic for us this summer, especially in our space. We're a co-manufactured brand, and in the salty snacks world, especially kettle chips, it has been a very challenging year to find line time. Some of the largest plants in our category have gone offline due to natural disasters in the last 14 months. So the industry is still kind of trying to pick up the slack, build new production facilities, add more kettles where they're needed, shift production from different warehouses to different facilities to some that maybe have some capacity left. So that has been, I would say, the biggest challenge on our side. Our raw materials, we have great partners, and we've done a pretty good job at maintaining those. We had to change some materials and our structures for like our packaging, but we have great relationships on those sides. So those were a little seamless. Maybe projects took a couple weeks longer than we would like, but still able to execute. So, but yeah, I would say finished goods inventory is the biggest hurdle that we kind of have right now.
Okay, which is great to just kind of let everyone know and be thinking about it. We're talking about forecasting. We're going to be talking about how do you try to use your crystal ball and see into the future to support that growth, et cetera. But always remember there's only so much you can do. And it makes me think about, I remember in the beginning of the pandemic when I was reading articles about how some, senior executives were asking demand planners, why didn't you see this coming? And I was like, why didn't anyone see a global pandemic coming that was going to shut down? I don't know. Those macroeconomic, factor indicators. I guess if I were a good demand planner, I would have known that. But there are some things you can't control, natural disasters, and there's a lot of talk, especially this summer with heat waves and things like that, about sustainability and how climate change and those types of conversations need to be had because it directly affects the supply chain and it directly affects our ability to move goods, to produce, to support life. Supply chain support life, and you hear these or you read. I follow, as you can imagine, lots of people in the supply chain space on LinkedIn, and I see the supply chains will save the world, supply chains run the world, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not a lofty, like out of this world idea. If you have to make food, but you can't make food or store food or send food because of natural disasters that are caused by climate change, what I'm like, it is what it is. Okay, so let's get into, and I actually, so as I was thinking about and going through my anxiety this morning, as we talked about, not having slept, as I was thinking this morning and getting ready, I was thinking, is this going to be the first time? Because I know where our conversation can go. Is this going to be the first time that I either go over time, have to wrap things up quickly, don't get through everything, like, because I have to make sure that I keep us on track. So I've got the action items pulled up here. Before we get into them, though, just so that we're all on the same page, we're calling this forecasting. You're naming it forecasting. We didn't say demand planning, supply planning. In your mind, what is the difference, if there is a difference, or if it's just, terminology? And then what does it mean to forecast and plan in your mind? And you mentioned, the article about like the mental kind of space of forecasting. So why don't you talk to the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, and forecasting definitely can mean a lot of things. And I actually meant to I did have that on my mental checklist of I should probably define what this means to me and what this means to Hen of the Woods. For us, forecasting is in a sense kind of demand planning, and for us, it ties to so many different aspects of our business. So when we do forecasting, we're not just forecasting, we're going to do X amount of revenue next month. We do forecasting at a SKU and channel and or retailer level. So we say we're going to sell 500 cases of salt to this retailer this month. And so that's how we are doing our forecasting. We rely on that forecasting for accuracy. I try to keep it super accurate up to about a quarter per quarter. I do it for the whole year, but when you're a small CPG brand, it does not matter what's going to happen in 10 months. You can try your best.
Or a brand.
Yeah. And it's just what I'm talking about is not forecasting and financial modeling for something that you're going to take to an investor or that you're going to say, this is my 3, 5, 10 year. I'm talking about, what are we going to make? What is it going to cost? Who is going to buy it? What are the promotions that go along with it? Are we going to need more raw materials to support it? And do we have the cash flow to support all of those things that I just said? So for us, it's connecting all of those dots day in, day out. So we're a small team. We have to connect all of those dots. We're also bootstrapped. So, we are operating on cash flow. So having good forecasting, connecting it to all those other layers and making sure that we're going to pay our bills and be as profitable as we can.
I have a question related to that, because you mentioned that you guys were in a couple of different sales channels. and you have to think about like the case pack and how that might be different for different sales channels. And I think that sometimes people underestimate the complexity that is planning those different sales channels and forecasting for those different sales channels, especially down to the SKU level, et cetera, as would be, a general best practice. So what's some advice that you have about doing that well? Or even when to transition into another sales channel? Because some people are like, yeah, I'm going to do D2C. And I talked to someone maybe about 3 weeks ago, and they're in retail, but they're regional retail. They haven't really figured out the distribution model yet. And they said, yeah, we want to do D2C. I was like, well, maybe you should not. Like maybe you should wait, until you figure out the retail piece, at least, get that going, because it's a different, you forecast it differently, you plan it differently, you have different packaging, all of that. So I'm answering my question for you, but
yeah, no, I mean, we definitely think about every channel, very differently, as I mentioned. And we do a lot of our own fulfillment in-house, which helps us to be able to solve these problems a lot more simply. So we don't have to work with necessarily our co-manufacturer or a 3PL to do repacks and to do custom case packs, call it, for our Amazon SKUs or anything along those lines. We're able to execute those things in-house. Sometimes we outsource them if we don't have enough time to do a repack or do a kitting for a retailer or something along those lines. But we do have fulfillment in-house. And when I say fulfillment in-house, I mean we have one full-time fulfillment guy, and then the rest of the company jumps down there and does what we need to do day in, day out to make sure that we get product out. We actually take a lot of pride in our fulfillment. We do all of our own B2B e-commerce fulfillment, which that is a very specific case pack. That one we had to optimize for freight or thinking about how we're shipping via UPS. So a lot of testing kind of went in there to see what shows up in good shape, because obviously the more you ship in a smaller box, the more efficient it is economically for you to ship more product in a smaller space. But does it show up in the condition that you want it to? So there was some testing there to kind of figure out.
You don't like crumbly chips because you've packed them in a tiny box.
We just poke holes in the bags to get all the air out so we can take up that space. So we just say that's one of our sustainability measures. But yeah, we definitely.
I want to derail the conversation to talk about logistics and how you decided to do fulfillment internally versus outsourcing. But I also want to maybe come back to that if we have time, and get into our first action item as we're talking about forecasting for different channels and things like that. How do you choose the right metrics? Because I did a project, and I will keep what is it, not say the name to protect the innocent or something like that, or maybe in this case to protect the guilty. But about 2 years ago now, no, that was pandemic, about 3 years ago, and we were building out Anaplan, and they just kept adding more metrics and more metrics and more metrics and more metrics. And I was like, okay, at some point, honestly, 5 of these metrics are telling you the same thing, So how do you choose the right metrics when you're trying to forecast these different channels?
I mean, our primary metric that we make sure we are doing, first one is, are we producing enough for what we say we're going to sell? Like, what is our gap on inventory versus what we are projecting that we are going to sell to these retailers? And if there is a gap, then we start looking at what channels are we going to maybe hold back, or how much are we going to take off certain POs. But we're not I have to say, we're not really intense on metrics. For us, it's just like, are we selling what we're making? Are we making what we say we're going to sell? And then are we shipping everything on time? When it comes to other, like our supply chain and our raw material metrics, we have PARs that we keep in house and that we like to hit. So that's another useful metric that we look at day in day out. Where are our raw material pars, and keeping on top of all of our lead time pars for each, the metrics on all of our lead times for each one of those raw materials. So we keep it pretty simple, because the more metrics you have, the more different problems you're trying to solve, and a lot of times there's redundancies, and a lot of times solving one problem can actually create another problem. So we keep it pretty simple. We have the luxury of keeping it pretty simple as a smaller brand who does our own fulfillment and who only has a couple of different co-manufacturer partners. So, we've also built the company to be as simple as possible and not overcomplicate it. So, yeah, metrics are not something that we obsess over too often.
But it sounds like it's the metrics that matter to the cash flow. And
yes.
about, like, are we selling? Are we making the revenue? Are we producing? What's the cost of goods sold? What is potentially missed sales? And, from an inventory perspective, are you overproducing? And that goes to your inventory holding cost, your freight costs. We talked about optimizing for that. So I do think it's important to call out that the metrics that you guys are tracking, be it on the supply chain side, finance side, if you want to break those two separate in operations, whatever you want to call it, it all ties back to the financial plan. And I think that it's really important for the supply chain practitioners, the operations, professionals that are watching, that are going to catch the recording, to really understand how that world affects the finances of the business and can drive, profits and drive revenue if executed properly, because so many people think of supply chain as the cost. It's just the cost of doing business, the cost of goods sold. And, if this, if you are out of stock, then you're not making money, and you could be making money. And
not just as their cost, but it's the timing of said cost. So it's timing your expenses that is, in our eyes, like the most important piece. Like, you only have so much power over how much things are going to cost. You have a lot more power of when you're going to buy them and what quantities you're going to buy them. And so that's how it relates to cash flow at our business. So it's because I also do the sales side. So when I have expansions coming and I know that we're going to be launching in a retailer, and I've got 6 months to prepare for that, and I know we're going to get deductions on the back end from free fills or new slotting fees in the distribution center. Like, we're forecasting all of those expenses out as well. So we're able to look at all of those metrics, all of those different pieces of the cash flow, and decide, okay, we're going to be cash safe here in January. Let's buy more packaging compared to March, when maybe we need it more in March, but cash flow is going to be tighter in March because we've got that expansion hitting. So lining up all those different pieces with cash flow on the finance side it's so important, especially when you're on a small team and you're at a small brand.
So that leads us to action items 2 and 3, and I want to get into these a little bit more. So action item 2, make sure that you are leveraging your forecast to make better purchasing decisions. And then action item 3, consider TCO principles for expansion distribution, TCO, total cost of ownership. So going back to unpack a little bit of what you mentioned, Brady, of how you guys use your forecast to be able to say, okay, in 6 months, this is going to happen, or we don't see the future, but we're expecting this to happen, So when you're thinking about purchasing decisions, and then when you're thinking about expansion distribution, what does that look like for, how you're using your forecast to make those strategic decisions? And which I think is a very, well, it's sort of strategic, also sort of tactical, because you're purchasing raw materials, you might be purchasing packaging, things like that. But it's also important to, I think, note that if you are tracking the right metrics, in the right way and you understand how they affect your business, then you're going to be able to make better strategic decisions as opposed to just what do I have to do today? Because you have to be looking,
Yeah.
forward and planning for the next step.
Yeah. So one of those metrics that if you obsess over can actually get you in trouble on the cash flow side is your cost of goods. So, obviously you have to keep your cost of goods within a window. I mean, everyone knows this. You can't go crazy on your cost of goods, but obsessing over making that like your one, your true north metric could potentially cause you to overbuy and to overspend during a certain quarter if you're not looking at maybe what's coming up. So we try to keep, our margins, our cost of good margins in between a certain window, knowing that some months it's going to be higher, some months it's going to be lower. But the big thing is like we want to make sure we have the cash to support expansion. So saving 2 cents an impression on our film or having an extra example, $20,000 in the bank, what do we need more right now? For us, expanding and growing, we need that cash because we might have unforeseen expenses coming up in the next quarter that we're going to be, we can't calculate precisely. We can give projections on, you launch into a new retailer and you're running a promotion. You have projections on what you think you're going to sell and how much deductions you're going to get. But if you absolutely crush it, those deductions might be way more. So having some flexibility with cash flow is more important to us than necessarily like the cost of goods side. So that's part of that purchasing practices that we really try to think about every time that we're placing a PO for raw materials is thinking, how is this going to affect cash flow? And are we going to be able to have enough cash to support growing?
Now, I have a thought that just came to mind, and the way that you talk about operations, and even just how you just talked about cost of goods sold. I mean, there are a lot of people in the operation side that I think are just, how do we minimize the cost of goods sold? How do we just we want to minimize costs as much as possible so that we can, increase profits as much as possible. And that leads you to make, like you say, if you just think about it from that one-sided tunnel vision perspective, maybe not the best decision for what you really need to do to grow and to be strategic. But in what your answers got me to thinking about was a concept that we've been talking about in the industry for a couple of years now. And that is the idea that you should not look at your supply chain operations as a cost center as opposed to a revenue center or a profit center. Because culturally, when you say this is the cost, it's even subconscious. It's been ingrained in us in business. You want to reduce your cost. So that's the only, you can't see the forest for the trees because it's the only thing you're thinking about. Whereas if you say, how do I leverage this to make more money, to grow, to scale, etc. The way that you're speaking is, in my mind, kind of a manifestation of that concept. And people ask all the time, if I say it, on certain webinars or things like that, one of the questions is always, what does that look like? You know what I mean? You're saying that it shouldn't be only a cost center, but how do we transition, or how do we start a foundation to where we don't just think of it as cost? So was it just natural for you guys to sit down and say, yes, we're going to save money on costs, but we need this cash? Or was that a lesson learned?
Lesson learned.
Okay.
Very much a lesson learned. So yeah, it was probably about 2018. Was a really pivotal year for our brand. We had a ton of expansion, and we were growing, we were doubling revenue every year in the first few years, and we got ahead of ourselves quite a bit. We were opening up new distribution centers, new retailers at a pretty rapid rate, and at that point in time, I was doing our forecasting and our modeling a little less strategically and more of looking at historicals and, okay, we grew 400%. Okay, we grew 300% this month over this month. And well, that's not sustainable. It's not going to maintain. So we purchased way more film than we should have. We had any business buying. And I mean, it became a major cash flow issue for us. And we had to start saying no to all expansion and to a lot of new opportunities, um, because we knew we didn't have the cash to support it because we had so much money tied up in raw materials. Our cost of goods were the best that they've ever been,
Mhm.
but it still slowed us
Which
down
is
a
great
lot.
if you're tracking metrics.
If that's what I'm saying, like if that's the only
Our cost
metric
of
that
goods
you're
is so
tracking,
low. We don't have
you
money to do
know,
anything else.
you're gonna sleep great tonight if that's all you care about, and you're getting it there. But and every company is different, every situation is different, and I hope I try really hard to never come off as an absolutist, and I just try to share my experiences, and I think one of the reasons that you know I've been trying to talk more and share more is so there's not a ton of resources out there for smaller and emerging brands, for the people from 1 to 10 person teams that are just really trying to figure it out and make it work, pay bills and grow and connect all the dots. So yeah, that's where I think obsessing over the wrong metrics can kind of get you into trouble.
Yeah, and another thing that this made me think about, kind of to the choose the right metrics perspective, and I hope that people aren't frustrated, because with action items, I always try to be very precise and saying choose the right metrics. People might be saying, "What are the right metrics? Tell me what the right metrics are." But I mean, it depends. And I hate to say it depends, but it depends on what are your strategic goals? What are you trying to achieve? Where are you right now in your journey? What issues are you facing? And one thing that I can say that just came to mind with what you said is that the metric should show the overall picture and tell the story. So if you're choosing cost of goods sold because someone told you that you should be tracking cost of goods sold, and you're only looking at it from cost of goods sold, but you're not looking at how it is affecting everything else and how it sits into the greater picture, then you're not really choosing the right metric in the right way. So when we say choose the right metrics, make sure that those metrics are telling the entire story and they're playing together and you understand how they're related, as opposed to individual calculations from data.
Yeah, and I think the other metrics is cash flow. I mean, it's very much a metric that you should be measuring your cash flow, and you should be keeping track and making sure that it's hard to do monthly to make sure you're always going to be profitable every month, because that's just not how business works. But looking at things holistically, looking at things quarterly, trailing 12s, whatever you want to kind of think about, whatever works for your business. Um, Cash flow is such an important metric that, I mean, 82% of all small businesses that fail do so because they run out of cash, not because they have a bad product, not because they have poor supply chain, not because they have poor marketing. They just run out of money. So that's why I continue to just kind of harp
So
on
maybe
that.
they run out of money because of those things. Poor
Sure,
marketing, poor
absolutely,
supply
absolutely.
chain, poor
But most of the time, it's just poor cash management. It's
yeah.
overextending. So yeah.
So using forecasting to consider that. Now, wrapping up the total cost of ownership principle around the expansion and the distribution. You talked about some lessons learned, but just so that we say it explicitly, what are some of the variables to consider when you're thinking about expansion and distribution? And I think that we kind of talked about, it's not just the sales team, but where are they? It's not just the distribution. So maybe they're going to give you a really good rate, but if your customers are all southeast and this distribution center is in California, then you're going to have your freight costs that are through the roof. So what are some different variables that you guys consider when you're thinking about the holistic picture of, does this make sense for a cash flow for expansion distribution?
Yeah, right now transportation is pretty much like at the top of that list, because transportation it's come down. Costs have come down a little bit here in the last quarter or so, but that is, especially with our product, we are shipping air essentially, and very cheap air. We're not selling things that cost $10. We're selling things that cost between $2 and $4. So volume is the name of the game for us. And as an emerging brand, it's hard to hit those volume metrics and get people to buy volume when you're new to that market. So um, transportation costs are huge, and then just the in-store activation. Like, what is it going to cost us to get the customer to see our stuff? Do we need to work with an area sales manager or an outside sales team to go in and hang shelf talkers? Do we need to hit the road and go visit 60 stores in the Mid-Atlantic region to introduce ourselves to store managers and have hotels and do that whole road trip thing, which we've definitely done. And then from the distribution side, you know, whenever you expand with retail, you're opening up new distribution centers. Each one of those distribution centers comes with new fees, uh, slotting fees, activation fees. Um, every one of those expansions comes with free fills for the most part. 95% of them, retailers expect at least one free case per SKU when they bring your product in. So calculating those and ensuring that you're calculating those properly. So many people think about calculating that off their cost of goods or their selling price to the distributor, but you actually need to be calculating those to be as safe as possible off of the wholesale list price from that distributor, not even like the negotiated retailer rate. So those are some of the initial pitfalls that we weren't taking into account that did catch us off guard. So now we're thinking about things a lot differently when we are looking at what does it look like to expand. The other thing is we try really hard to expand in a healthy and regional out approach. We don't have any brand equity in Arizona, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of money to go expand into Arizona. That doesn't make sense for our brand. We do have brand equity in the Northeast, so we will invest in the Northeast to go expand there. So we're Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and growing Southeast, North Atlantic. So we try to think about things that way. And so every retailer that comes our way that's outside of those regions, we're very, very critical of those opportunities, making sure that not only do we have the finances set aside for the expansion costs, but then also the in-store activation. Do we want to do demos? Are we going to do coupons? Are we going to do store visits? All of those little pieces.
Um, we got a 10-minute warning a couple of minutes ago from Nicole, and I may have jinxed us because we are only on action item number 3, and and we've already gotten the warning. So as I said in the beginning, we might not actually get through everything, but I did want to share a thought from what you just said of we're not going to go into Arizona when our brand equity is, in New Jersey. And I think that just as a business owner in general, regardless of what industry you're in, very often you might get into the I want to do it all now. I want to like I said, I talked to the company that is regionally distributed retail in the Northeast, and the conversation that we had was, how do we do D2C nationally? By not doing it. Like right now, by not doing it, that's the best solution. And I mean, otherwise, if you're saying that, well, we want to transition to D2C, like that's where we think our bread and butter is going to be. We've done the forecasting, we've figured it out. Then we can have the conversation of, regional distribution, partners, things like that. But how did you guys decide? Again, maybe perhaps lesson learned, because you talked
Lesson
about
learned.
growing. Let's do it. Okay, so answer is lesson learned. To that point, then, and I don't even want to say for people that are starting a brand and like have a really good idea. I'm going to make a really good product because this tastes really good, and I'm going to hit the road, and I'm going to, get in front of customers, and we're going to build, demand around this product. And I don't really know what I'm doing with anything else. So you talked about how, you're providing the tips that you would have wanted someone to tell you 4 years ago. But what are some other resources? And I think about it even from just the perspective of people that are maybe new to supply chain, new to operations, not only working for, a startup brand, but if you're new, or even if you've been in it for a long time and you want to, think about some of these things and learn more about them. Was it just trial and error for you? If you can tell people, learn from my mistakes, go here. Is it just follow me? I will give you all of the information. Are there conferences? Are there books? Is some of it just, you just have to have the experience?
I think a lot of it is experience, and the other path, I think a lot of it is just mental frameworks, which are the things that I try to share, not only just like the tactics, but just mental frameworks. One of the best mental framework books I think that has really helped me learn to say no is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. So if you've not read that book, again, that's Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It is an incredible book that makes you think so much about saying no and what is really essential to like your highest level of contribution. Like, what is the highest level of contribution that I could bring to the organization or to my brand or to the company at this time? And it just helps you structure, helps you streamline your decision-making process and be able to put things in buckets a little more easily without having to like do a 10-minute, it's just less mental exhaustion if you have some of those essential items and some of those North Stars, and you can easily say, no, this is not a line. We are done here. We're not going to talk to Arizona retailer because it doesn't work. So that's a great book that I really enjoyed that kind of touches on that. Other podcast is Farnham Street podcast, The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish. Really great resource that is all about kind of different mental frameworks and things along that line. So I've picked up some things from there for sure. Very just actionable, action items type of takeaways.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not going to get to all of the action items. But I did want to flash the very last one. Consider the strong opinions weekly held forecasting model. What does that mean?
So strong opinions weekly held is kind of, one of those tropes that I think can get you into trouble, and oftentimes it can reward like the most bombastic voice in the room that says, like, I say this the loudest, I feel strongly about it, and now prove me wrong. So I'm not a full supporter of that trope in all contexts, but in the context of forecasting, it's just like get started, like create some opinions, create what you think based upon even just your basic rudimentary QuickBooks data. You don't need to spend $40,000 a year on a Spins or Nielsen or IRI, like when you're a young brand. Don't do that. That's bad.
If you don't take away anything else, don't do that. That's bad.
Don't do that. That's bad.
Save your money.
You don't. If your only goal is to do fundraising and exit in like 2 years, then maybe. But if you want to build something sustainable, no, that's not my way to do it. But buy the data from your distributors if you can do that. But get as much data as you can as cheaply as possible, and you create your initial forecast off of that, and they're probably going to be wrong, but it's your job to have some strong opinions and say, no, I'm going to sell 500 cases, and then try to prove yourself wrong, which is the weekly held part. So be like, okay, well, what if there's a heat wave out in the West and I can't ship this? What's this do for my forecasting? What if
scenario
the world
planning.
what if the world decides that it no longer likes salt and vinegar chips? What is this? So, which would be terrible because that's the number one seller. But so
Well,
what
you're
if
sure
this
you come up with something
retailer
else, I'm sure.
yeah, what if this retailer discontinues us? What does that look like? So it's a lot of just like trying to prove yourself wrong and why wouldn't this happen? And you'll start to deduce like the things that are actually, potential, and things that are you just kind of, making stuff up just to throw a wrench in your own wheel. But it's all about just like trying to prove yourself wrong. And then you just keep doing that month in, month out. Like our forecasting used to just be revenue numbers on a whiteboard. And now it's, I don't even want to say how many tabs and how many different sheets that it connects to. But you just layer on the things that you think are important and the channels you think are important over time, and then you continue to beat those up, and continue to prove yourself wrong. You learn, and then you make the adaptations moving forward. So that's I just like that essay. Paul Sappho is his name. He's got some other really good essays. If you go to his website on a myriad of different topics. He was in like kind of Silicon Valley mid 2000s era. So he's just got a unique perspective on a lot of different topics. So he's a good read. His essays can be pretty, and they're short too.
Thank you for that. And what we will try to do, and I will make no promises, what we will try to do is go back and record, find all of these, and then add them in the comments, because these LinkedIn lives are recorded and saved to the LinkedIn world for forever. So you can always come back here and check the comments, get the links and things like that. So we are over time for the very first time. Next show is October 14th. So we were over time and also didn't get to everything.
Sorry.
But it was a great conversation. I hope that everyone took notes, took something away. If you didn't take notes, there's the recording. You can go back and watch it. So we will sign off and see you guys next month. Thank you for joining, Brady.
All right. Great to see you.